Yellowstone National Park was greeted by an uncharacteristic early snowfall as late autumn settled in. A white shroud several inches thick had settled upon the cooling earth, muting the vibrant hues of the Upper Geyser Basin's famous geothermal springs. It was here, amidst plumes of steam and the tang of sulfur, that the trail of the Dawson family went cold. Father, mother, 2 children. Their absence wasn't noticed immediately. Nearly a full day passed before the park employee responsible for the campgrounds raised the alarm, discovering their vacant campsite, paid for several days in advance. The local sheriff, to placate the few remaining tourists and the press, offered a plausible explanation. The Dawsons had gotten lost, or perhaps they'd been attacked by a grizzly. In these parts, despite all precautions, such things happened from time to time. Bill Hargrove, a park ranger with over 20 years of service and a veteran of the Vietnam campaign, led one of the first search parties. His face, etched with wrinkles and weathered by the elements, betrayed little emotion, but his eyes, trained to detect the slightest shift in his surroundings, were intense with focus. He found their camp. The 4-person tent was ripped apart with the force of a small explosive charge. Its fabric hung in tatters from the bent poles of the frame. Sleeping bags dragged outside were slashed open and stained with dark brownish patches that the snow hadn't yet fully concealed. Signs of a struggle were evident. Trampled snow, several broken saplings nearby, scattered personal belongings, a child's boot, a paperback novel, an empty thermos. But there were no bodies. Not a single trace indicated where they had gone. Only deep, chaotic prints in the snow, impressions Hargrove couldn't immediately identify. The search continued for another 48 hours. Rangers were joined by volunteers from nearby settlements, people familiar with these forests and mountains. Finally, one of the groups, combing a dense spruce thicket half a mile from the ravaged campsite, stumbled upon the remains of the Dawson family. They were merely fragmentary, scattered over an area of several dozen square yards. Hargrove, one of the first to arrive at the scene, fought back a wave of nausea. The nature of the injuries was monstrous. Enormous ragged wounds had been inflicted by gigantic claws. Bones, even the largest, were snapped like dry twigs. Bite marks on the few identifiable fragments indicated jaws far exceeding the size and power of any known predator in North America. Neither a grizzly nor a cougar, nor even a pack of wolves, could have wrought such devastation. Hargrove noted the tracks left on the semi-frozen ground beneath the thin layer of fresh snow, made after the bodies had been torn apart. They were disproportionately large, with clear imprints of 5 toes and long, non-retractable claws. The track resembled that of a wolf, but was far more massive and indicated that the creature that left it moved on both 4 and 2 limbs. The local coroner, Dr. Alani Reeves, a middle-aged woman with a short haircut and a discerning gaze, arrived at the scene with a forensics team. Dr. Reeves had experience as a military pathologist and had seen a great deal, but what she encountered in Yellowstone was beyond the scope of her practice. After a thorough examination of the remains and the discovery site, she compiled a preliminary report. It included the phrase, "attack by an unknown biological entity, characterized by extreme aggression and physical strength." Dr. Reeves's report, complete with photographs and a detailed description of the injuries, was flagged requires immediate attention of federal agencies and sent via secure channels to the regional FBI field office. From there, after a brief consultation and assessment of the incident's unique nature, the materials were rerouted to an organization whose existence was known to few. The Department of Unconventional Threat Assessment and Neutralization. In the sterile, windowless offices of the Department of Unconventional Threat Assessment and Neutralization, Dunton headquarters, nestled deep within Fort Meade, Maryland, Dr. Reeves's report landed on the desk of Director James Hamilton. Hamilton, a silver-haired man in his 60s with a face as if hewn from granite and eyes that, according to his subordinates, could see right through a person, studied the documents intently. He showed no surprise. After a brief meeting with his lead analysts, he initiated Protocol Cryptid Alpha. Dunton specialists immediately set to work, pulling archival files related to unexplained disappearances and strange incidents in the Yellowstone region over the past 150 years. A disturbing cyclical pattern emerged, specific time intervals between outbreaks of unexplained activity, always accompanied by human casualties. At the same time, in a sparsely furnished apartment in a quiet suburb of Washington, D.C., a man known to a select few by the operational pseudonym Orion, and to an even smaller circle by his true, ancient name, Cain, was finishing his morning workout. His days flowed according to a strict, established routine. Hours of grueling physical exercise, pushing his body to the limits of human endurance and even beyond. Deep meditation aimed at controlling his consciousness and taming his inner demons. Long, careful study of ancient manuscripts written in long-dead languages and modern tactical manuals on asymmetrical warfare. His bare torso was covered in countless scars, a testament to battles stretching back millennia. The weight of centuries, the burden of lifetimes lived and deeds done, lay heavy on his soul. He knew that his current peace, this lull, was temporary, nothing more than a brief respite before the next challenge. The signal came on a special communication device, disguised as an old model pager. A short, encrypted message. Phoenix has awakened. Activation code. Yellowstone 778. Report to facility mirror at 6 o'clock the next day. It was an order for immediate mobilization. Orion showed no emotion. He read the message silently. Then, following standard operating procedure, destroyed the device, reducing it to a handful of ash. While Orion prepared for departure, new alarming information arrived from Yellowstone. In the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone River area, several dozen miles from where the Dawson family met their end, a group of 3 geologists, contracted by the United States Geological Survey, had gone missing. Their camp was found empty, but untouched. The men had simply vanished. However, a few hundred yards from the camp, drag marks and extensive bloodstains were found on the snow. Panic began to mount among local authorities and the sparse population living near the park's borders. But Dunton had already taken the situation under its discreet control. A media blackout operation was initiated. A cover story about a leak of toxic volcanic gases from geothermal vents in several areas of the park was fed to the press. This necessitated immediate evacuation and closure of certain zones to visitors. This bought Dunton the time and space needed to conduct its operation without undue attention. The next morning, long before dawn, Orion arrived at an inconspicuous building on the outskirts of an industrial zone not far from the capital. The building's facade bore the sign of a Federal Emergency Management Agency logistics center. It was merely a front, concealing the entrance to a secret Dunton facility code-named Mirror. The clearance procedure was multi-layered and took nearly half an hour. Retinal scan, fingerprint identification, voice recognition, personal access code verification. Each stage proceeded in sterile silence, under the watchful eyes of faceless security personnel in stern suits. In a conference room, furnished with functional simplicity, Director Hamilton was already waiting for him. The fact that Hamilton had chosen to meet in person, rather than limit himself to a video conference, underscored the extreme seriousness of the situation. The director gave Orion a curt nod, gesturing to the chair opposite his desk. The briefing was concise and to the point. Hamilton outlined the known facts about the incidents in Yellowstone National Park, presenting preliminary analytical data from Dr. Reeves and Dunton's own experts. The operation had been assigned the codename Devil's Claw. Objective: identify the entity, assess the threat level, and if necessary, neutralize it immediately. The creature's preliminary codename was Vargur. The rules of engagement were strict, but allowed for flexibility. Lethal force was authorized only in the event of a direct and imminent threat to operatives' lives, or in the case of an obvious failure of the mission to contain and capture the entity. Hamilton then introduced Orion to the team he would be working with. Special Containment Unit, Griffin 1. First to enter was Lieutenant Eva Valkyrie Rostova, SCU commander. A tall, athletically built woman in her mid-30s, with short-cropped blonde hair and cold blue eyes. A veteran of numerous operations in Afghanistan and several classified zones worldwide, a specialist in close-quarters combat and heavy weaponry. She was followed by Dr. Arya Cassandra Sharma, xenobiologist, cryptolinguist, and the group's field analyst. A petite, seemingly fragile woman with dark hair pulled into a tight bun and large, observant brown eyes that studied everything. Sergeant Alex Ghost Renner, specialist in reconnaissance, extreme environment survival, and silent movement, a former Delta Force operator. Bringing up the rear was Corporal Jake Thunder Davis, communications security, electronic warfare, and UAV operations expert. Young, but already an experienced specialist who had participated in several Dunton operations. Team Griffin 1 was a well-oiled unit, having undertaken many assignments together. Orion was an enigma to them. Officially, he was listed as a consultant with special authority, attached to the group directly by Director Hamilton. His cover story was impeccable but unverifiable, and his actual capabilities and area of expertise remained a mystery to them. Lieutenant Rostova maintained an air of emphasized professional correctness, yet her gaze was appraising, even wary. Dr. Sharma, with unconcealed curiosity, tried to read Orion, analyzing his expressions, gestures, and demeanor. Sergeant Renner, as befitting an experienced scout, observed silently, memorizing every detail. Corporal Davis, the youngest and most direct in the group, attempted to lighten the mood with an ill-timed joke about the consultant's stern appearance, but immediately faltered under Lieutenant Rostova's icy stare. After the introductions, the team was granted access to Dunton's specialized armory. The selection of weapons and equipment was impressive. Their primary firearms were modified assault rifles. Sidearms were standard pistols. A sniper rifle was designated for Sergeant Renner. Ammunition included standard military rounds, tracers, and armor-piercing. Special attention was given to experimental munitions. Rounds with cores of specially treated, high-purity silver, capsule rounds containing a potent tranquilizer designed to neutralize large biological targets, and non-lethal electromagnetic pulse grenades. Equipment included reinforced Class 4+ body armor capable of stopping a rifle bullet, tactical helmets with integrated communication systems, night vision, and thermal imagers. Each operative's medical kit was expanded to include, in addition to standard supplies, powerful stimulants, broad-spectrum antidotes, and rapid clotting agents. Dr. Sharma presented her preliminary analysis of the available data. The nature of the victim's wounds, in her opinion, unequivocally pointed to a predator possessing immense physical strength and incredible speed, capable of dismembering a human body with both bare hands and claws. Analysis of the tracks discovered by Hargrove and later confirmed by Dunton specialists indicated movement on both 4 and 2 limbs. Sharma also noted the peculiar, almost ritualistic arrangement of the geologist's remains, suggesting the creature possessed rudimentary intelligence. Orion listened silently, then nodded, confirming her hypothesis and referencing certain historical precedents, without, however, elaborating on any specifics. The discussion of tactics for insertion into the operational zone took about an hour. Considering the need for maximum stealth and the remoteness of the Vargur's suspected area of activity from tourist trails and ranger patrol zones, a nighttime halo, high-altitude, low-opening parachute drop was chosen. Corporal Davis prepared a compact WASP reconnaissance UAV, equipped with a thermal imager and a high-resolution multispectral camera, as well as a Shield mobile electronic warfare suite, designed to suppress radio interception and enemy detection of the group. Director Hamilton approved the operational plan, once again reminding them of the importance of adhering to secure communication protocols and emergency evacuation procedures, known as Omega Protocol. A few hours later, Griffin 1, along with Orion, was aboard an unmarked Super Hercules military transport plane, flying at an altitude of over 30,000 feet. In the cargo bay, dimly lit by red lamps, a tense silence reigned. Each operative was lost in their own thoughts. Orion sat slightly apart from the others, his face inscrutable, but his ancient eyes gazed through the aircraft's fuselage into the darkness beyond, seeing something there inaccessible to the understanding of ordinary people. The biting cold of the high altitude was palpable even through their multi-layered gear. The aircraft was at 33,000 feet when a green light illuminated the cargo bay. The ramp slowly lowered, revealing an inky abyss, punctuated by sparse stars. Griffin 1, led by Orion, stepped into the void one by one. The freefall lasted several long minutes, the whistle of the wind in their ears the only sound. At the designated altitude, a mere 1,500 feet above the ground, their steerable wing parachutes deployed silently, slowing their rapid descent. Landing in the designated square, located in a dense forest expanse of Yellowstone National Park, was challenging. The rugged terrain, ancient trees, and deep shadows created additional difficulties. Orion, thanks to his millennia of experience and almost inhuman coordination, landed softly and precisely at the calculated point, instantly freeing himself from the parachute lines. Sergeant Renner, using a handheld navigator and miniature infrared beacons attached to each team member's gear, quickly determined the others' locations. The rendezvous went without incident, but the surrounding wilderness, full of nocturnal rustlings and unseen dangers, immediately instilled an oppressive sense of unease. The immediate priority was establishing a temporary operating base, TOB. Renner, showcasing his scouting skills, found an ideal location: an abandoned old trapper's cabin, built decades ago and almost completely hidden in a narrow rock crevice at the foot of a small hill. The cabin was dilapidated, but its log walls offered shelter. The team immediately began setting up the base. Motion sensors, seismic, and infrared were placed around the perimeter, camouflaged as rocks and tree roots. On the approaches to the cabin, Renner set up several tripwires that, when triggered, would send a silent signal to the operatives' tactical tablets. Corporal Davis deployed a compact satellite communication station, establishing a secure link with Dunton's situational center, and activated the SHIELD electronic warfare suite to create a local bubble of radio silence, impenetrable to external eavesdropping. Meticulous camouflage of the TOB using natural materials, branches, moss, fallen logs, took several hours of intense work. With the first rays of dawn barely penetrating the dense canopy, Orion and Sergeant Renner set out on reconnaissance. Their target was the last known location of the missing geologist team, approximately 3 miles northeast of the TOB. They moved with extreme stealth, using all available skills of camouflage and silent movement. Renner, considered one of the best survival and reconnaissance specialists in his unit, watched Orion with unconcealed amazement. The consultant moved through the dense undergrowth with the grace and silence of a phantom, leaving virtually no trace, his presence almost imperceptible. The geologist's campsite was a grim sight. Tents were torn, equipment, a portable drilling rig, a generator, crates of tools, scattered and partially smashed. The scene of a slaughter was evident, though. As with the Dawson family, there were no bodies. Orion meticulously examined the ground around the camp. He found several gigantic paw prints, deeply impressed into the soft soil near a stream. The tracks were fresh, no more than a day old, and definitely did not belong to any animal known to science in Yellowstone Park. On the wreckage of equipment and the bark of nearby trees, he found a few tufts of dark, coarse fur that had an unusual, almost metallic texture. Renner, surveying the perimeter, discovered deep claw marks on the trunks of several sturdy pines, more than 10 feet above the ground. This testified to the incredible strength and size of the creature that left them. The collected samples, tufts of fur, saliva samples found on a torn backpack, soil particles from the tracks, were immediately brought back to the TOB and handed over to Dr. Sharma. She set up her portable field laboratory and began their analysis. The results of a preliminary genetic study of the DNA extracted from the samples were anomalous and extremely alarming. Sharma informed Lieutenant Rostova and Orion that she had discovered a complex mixture of canid, dog-like genetic markers with unknown, previously uncatalogued sequences. She concluded that they were dealing either with a hitherto unknown species of predator possessing an extremely fast metabolism and unique physiology, or even more frighteningly, with a genetic chimera of artificial or unknown origin. At the strictly scheduled time, according to the communication window, Corporal Davis established contact with Dunton's situational center via an encrypted satellite channel. Lieutenant Rostova reported to Director Hamilton on the team's arrival, the successful deployment of the TOB, and the initial reconnaissance results. She emphasized that the data obtained confirmed the anomalous nature of the threat and its high degree of danger. An official request was made for additional support from geospatial intelligence, provision of detailed satellite imagery of the operational area in near real time to track possible movements of the entity. Hamilton acknowledged the report, demanding utmost caution and strict adherence to standard operating procedures. The first night at the TOB passed in tense anticipation. 2-person watch shifts were organized. The deep, primordial silence of the Yellowstone forest frayed their nerves. Every snap of a twig, every distant rustle, made hearts pound and hands clench weapons. The operatives, despite having modern night vision and thermal imagers, felt vulnerable, exposed to an unseen enemy. Orion stood his watch alone, motionless in the dilapidated doorway of the cabin, his silhouette barely discernible in the dense darkness. He needed no devices to see in the dark. He sensed the presence of something ancient, malevolent, and incredibly powerful lurking in the night shadows. This presence which the other team members only vaguely perceived, attributing their unease to fatigue and nervous tension. Orion, however, knew the hunt had begun. Over the next few days, Griffin 1 dedicated itself to systematically searching for the Vargur's lair. The operatives employed a clover-leaf search pattern, meticulously combing square after square, expanding the search area from the creature's last known point of activity. Corporal Davis provided aerial reconnaissance and cover with the WASP UAV. The small drone, equipped with a thermal imager and multispectral camera, patrolled above the treetops, transmitting images to Lieutenant Rostova's tactical tablet. However, the dense forest canopy and significant geothermal activity in some areas, creating numerous thermal interferences, severely hampered target detection from the air. On the third day of the search, Sergeant Renner, moving at the head of one of the search pairs with Orion, stumbled upon what he mentally dubbed the Trail of Terror. It was a barely visible chain of gigantic tracks, different from those they had seen before. These tracks were clearer, left when the creature moved unhurriedly, confidently. The trail led deep into an impassable, overgrown gorge, not marked on old park maps. As they progressed along this trail, they increasingly encountered the remains of wild animals, deer, elk, even one young bison. All were torn apart with a peculiar, almost demonstrative brutality. Orion, carefully examining each victim, noted a strange detail. Some of the animals were killed but not eaten. Their bodies were mutilated but left virtually untouched. This was not the behavior of an ordinary predator killing for sustenance. It was a display of power, a way to mark territory, and a bizarre form of intimidation for anyone who dared follow this trail. The chain of tracks led them to the foot of an ancient, extinct volcano, its slopes covered with solidified lava flows and scree. Here, amidst a jumble of basalt boulders, lay hidden the entrance to an extensive cave system. The entrance was artfully camouflaged with fallen trees and dense thickets of wild grape, so it could only be found if one knew where to look, or stumbled upon it by chance, as they had. Orion immediately noted the presence of several narrow crevices leading to secondary exits, located higher up the slope. This was not just a wild beast's den, but a carefully chosen and modified shelter, providing both concealment and escape routes. The air at the entrance was heavy, thick with the nauseating stench of decay and animal musk. Inside the first, most spacious cave, where daylight barely penetrated, lay gnawed bones of previous victims, animals, and also, judging by some fragments, humans. In one of the side, drier caves, Dr. Sharma, who had arrived at the lair's discovery site with Lieutenant Rostova, made an astonishing discovery. On smooth sections of the stone walls, she found crude but discernible drawings, made with a mixture of blood and charcoal. The images were primitive, but carried clear semantic meaning. They depicted hunting scenes, a gigantic wolf-like creature standing on its hind legs, towering over human figures, and also some abstract symbols vaguely resembling ancient runes or pictograms. Sharma immediately began to photograph and sketch them, understanding that these drawings were irrefutable proof that the Vargur possessed not just instincts, but a rudimentary form of symbolic thought and some semblance of ritualistic behavior. Moving deeper into the cave system, exercising extreme caution and constantly checking gas analyzer readings. Volcanic caves always posed a risk of toxic gas accumulation. The team stumbled upon another grim find. In a distant narrow passage, they discovered the semi-decomposed remains of a man. Judging by the gear lying nearby, an old rifle, a hunting knife, and a rotted backpack, it was a local lone hunter who had gone missing several weeks ago, even before the incident with the Dawson family. In the backpack, among other things, a small notebook, wrapped in oiled cloth, had miraculously survived. It was a diary of sorts. In it, the hunter described his pursuit of an enormous, never-before-seen wolf demon, as he called it. The first entries were made with a steady hand, full of a hunter's excitement. However, as the diary progressed, the tone of the entries changed, becoming increasingly anxious, then overtly panicked. The last pages were scrawled in a trembling, barely legible hand. The hunter wrote that the creature was watching him, toying with him like a cat with a mouse, appearing and disappearing before finally attacking. He mentioned burning yellow eyes glowing in the dark and an inhuman roar in which sometimes sounds like words could be heard. Upon careful examination of the approaches to the main lair entrance and several secondary exits, Sergeant Renner discovered further evidence of their adversary's considerable intelligence. These were primitive but fiendishly effective traps. Several deep wolf pits, camouflaged with a thin layer of turf and branches, with sharpened stakes at the bottom. Several snares made of lianas as strong as steel wire, set on animal trails leading to the cave. This discovery shocked even the experienced operatives of Griffin 1. An ordinary animal, no matter how large and ferocious, was incapable of creating such complex and purposeful traps. It became definitively clear that their adversary, the Vargur, possessed not just instincts, but also developed tactical thinking, the ability to plan and anticipate the actions of its pursuers. The realization of the true scale of the threat caused the first serious disagreements regarding tactics for further action within the group. Lieutenant Rostova, as commander, responsible for her people's lives and the mission's success, insisted on immediately placing powerful shaped charges at all known entrances and exits of the cave system. Her plan was to either destroy the Vargur inside its lair, or flush it out into the open, where it would be neutralized with heavy weaponry. Orion categorically objected to this approach. He pointed out the high risk of a complete collapse of the cave system, which would not only destroy any possibility of further study of the creature, which was one of Dunton's secondary but important objectives, but also lead to unpredictable geological consequences in the unstable volcanic zone. Furthermore, he was convinced that the Vargar had other unknown exits from this labyrinth. Orion proposed continuing covert observation, studying the creature's movement patterns, and luring it out of its lair to a pre-prepared position. The tension between the pragmatic, results-oriented SCU commander and the enigmatic consultant began to palpably escalate. After Griffin 1 discovered and thoroughly investigated its main lair in the cave system at the foot of the extinct volcano, the Vargar, as the operatives now called it, adopting the code name from Dunton's instructions, drastically changed its tactics. It abandoned the caves, leaving no tracks indicating a new shelter. Instead, it began a peculiar, sinister game with its pursuers. Motion sensors installed by the team on its presumed movement routes began to trigger falsely, reacting to a passing deer or a gust of wind that swayed a heavy branch. However, sometimes after such false alarms, operatives would find fresh, enormous tracks of the Vargar leading to deliberate dead ends, to the edges of deep precipices, into impassable swampy lowlands, or towards dangerous geothermal zones with boiling mud pots and poisonous fumes. The creature was intentionally leading them in circles, exhausting them and testing their patience. Corporal Davis, to regain control of the situation and obtain some information about the Vargar's whereabouts, relaunched the WASP reconnaissance UAV. The drone ascended to an altitude of about 300 feet and began a systematic scan of the new presumed area of the creature's activity, a dense forest expanse abundant with ravines and rock outcrops. During one of its flyovers above a particularly dense section of forest, where the crowns of ancient fir trees almost touched, the image on Davis's tactical tablet suddenly froze, and then the screen went black. Connection with the WASP was lost. The last thing the drone's camera managed to transmit, a split second before the connection broke, was a blurred image of a huge, dark object flying rapidly straight into the lens. Judging by its trajectory and speed, it was a rock or a piece of cliff, thrown with incredible force and precision from below, from behind the dense canopy. This incident was further confirmation that the Vargar not only recognized the technological threat posed by the group, but was also effectively countering it, using available means and knowledge of the terrain. Simultaneously with these tactical ploys, the Vargar began to exert increasing psychological pressure on Griffin 1. With the onset of darkness, eerie, blood-curdling howls began to sound around their TOB. This was no ordinary wolf howl. It contained notes mimicking human cries for help, death rattles, and sometimes sounds resembling a distorted, malevolent laugh. At the edge of the established security perimeter, operatives on patrol increasingly found mutilated corpses of small animals, squirrels, rabbits, foxes, left in conspicuous places, sinister messages or warnings. Constant sleep deprivation, caused by the need for heightened vigilance and disturbing nocturnal sounds, chronic nervous tension, and the realization that they were being hunted not just by a wild beast, but by an intelligent, cunning, and ruthless enemy, began to gradually affect the group's morale. Corporal Davis became noticeably more nervous and irritable. his usual cheerfulness giving way to grim focus. Sergeant Renner, already taciturn, withdrew even further into himself, his face becoming an impenetrable mask. At Orion's suggestion, who understood that standard wild animal hunting methods were ineffective here, the team set up several specialized high-tech traps. Among them were net guns loaded with reinforced nets interwoven with threads of purified silver and ultrasonic emitters capable of generating high-frequency sound waves that cause severe disorientation and pain shock in most mammals. The locations for setting the traps were chosen with extreme care on the Vargur's trails, considering wind direction and terrain features. However, all these efforts proved futile. The Vargur either bypassed the traps in a wide arc, aware of their location, or even more astonishingly managed to neutralize them. One morning, the team found one of the net guns torn from the ground and smashed to pieces, and the cable leading to the ultrasonic emitter severed in several places by what looked like gigantic shears. The creature demonstrated astonishing intuition, an animalistic sixth sense enhanced by considerable intelligence, and an ability to detect even the most carefully camouflaged devices. Dr. Sharma, meticulously analyzing all of the Vargur's actions, its manner of leaving tracks, its evasion tactics, its methods of neutralizing traps, concluded that it was not just intelligent, but possessed highly developed adaptive intelligence. It learned quickly from its mistakes and instantly analyzed the group's behavior. In her next report to Dunton's Situational Center, she stated that the Vargur was actively studying the operatives' tactics and equipment, and even attempting to understand their language, catching snippets of radio communications, despite them being conducted on encrypted channels and using code phrases. Lieutenant Rostova, realizing that the situation was spiraling out of control and their initial capabilities were clearly insufficient to combat such an adversary, sent another report to Dunton's Situational Center. In it, she detailed the failure of all attempts to capture or neutralize the entity, emphasizing its growing aggression, cunning, and intellectual abilities. She urgently requested permission to use heavier weaponry, call for air support, and at the very least, dispatch an additional SCU team to reinforce the group. Director Hamilton's response, which arrived a few hours later, was disheartening. He expressed serious concern about the developing situation, but denied reinforcement, citing the need to maintain maximum secrecy for Operation Devil's Claw, and his opinion that Griffin 1's initial capabilities were still underestimated. This response provoked a hidden but strong irritation in Lieutenant Rostova, who felt they were being abandoned to face an enemy whose strength clearly far surpassed their own. The culmination of this psychological warfare was a gruesome discovery made by Sergeant Renner and Orion during another patrol of the TOB perimeter at dawn. About half a mile from the cabin, in a small, open clearing, they saw something that made even these hardened men's blood run cold. It was the remains of Ranger Bill Hargrove, the very man who had first discovered the signs of the Dawson family tragedy, and whose testimony had prompted the start of this operation. The unfortunate ranger's body was monstrously mutilated, but his head had been neatly severed and impaled on a tall, sharpened stake driven into the center of the clearing. Hargrove's face, frozen in a grimace of unutterable horror, was turned directly towards their TOB. Beside the stake, on the ground, lay his portable radio, crushed, judging by the imprint, by an enormous clawed paw. This was not just a killing. It was a clear, unambiguous message from the Vargar, a demonstration of its power, its contempt for its pursuers, and its complete control over this territory. Tension within Griffin 1 reached its breaking point. The loss of technological equipment, the psychological pressure, and finally, the demonstrative killing of Ranger Hargrove, all indicated that the Vargar not only did not fear them, but was actively playing its own game, imposing its rules. It was at this critical moment that Corporal Davis, on round-the-clock duty at the communications and radio intercept equipment, detected a weak, intermittent signal. After several minutes of intense work to amplify and decode it, Davis determined it was a distress signal from a personal emergency locator beacon. A database check revealed the beacon was registered to one of the tourists who had gone missing in Yellowstone Park several days prior. This was not the Dawson family, but a member of another, more recent group of two, whose disappearance had only recently become known after Operation Devil's Claw had begun. The signal was coming from a remote, mountainous area several dozen miles west of their TOB, from a sector that had not previously appeared in electronic or human intelligence reports as a Vargar activity zone. Lieutenant Rostova immediately called an emergency meeting. The situation was highly ambiguous. On one hand, the distress signal offered a chance to save a civilian's life, but on the other, the probability that it was another elaborate trap set by the Vargar was extremely high. The creature had already demonstrated its capacity for tactical thinking and manipulation. Despite the enormous risk and near certainty that it was a trap, Lieutenant Rostova, after a brief but tense discussion with Orion, decided to proceed to the signal source. To leave a civilian without aid, even if it was a phantom hope, contradicted the unwritten rules and internal convictions of most Dunton operatives, including Rostova herself. Dr. Sharma, despite the commander's objections, insisted on participating in the rescue team. She argued that, upon finding a survivor, she, as a specialist analyst, would be able to obtain the most valuable first-hand information about the Vargar. The journey to the signal's source was exceedingly difficult and dangerous. The team, consisting of Rostova, Orion, Sharma, and Renner, Davis remained at the TOB to maintain communications and coordination, had to traverse rocky ledges, ford icy mountain streams, and navigate through dense, almost impenetrable thickets. About halfway, as they crossed a narrow gorge, they were suddenly attacked by a pack of large, unusually aggressive wolves. The wolves acted in concert, with a clear intent to cut off the team's retreat and drive them into a trap. Orion and Renner, covering Rostova and Sharma, engaged the wolves. The sound of automatic weapons fire echoed through the gorge. Several wolves were killed. The rest, having suffered losses, retreated as suddenly as they had attacked. The wolves had not acted of their own accord, but were directed by some unseen, malevolent will. This further strengthened Orion's suspicion that the Vargar was in control of the situation. Finally, after several grueling hours, the team reached the signal source. It was a small, dark cave hidden behind dense bushes at the foot of a sheer cliff. Inside, in the dim light, they found the surviving tourist. It was a man in his 30s named Mark, according to his beacon data. He was in a state of extreme physical exhaustion and profound psychological shock. His clothes were torn, his body covered in scrapes and bruises, but surprisingly, he had no serious wounds characteristic of a Vargur attack. Mark was semi-conscious, muttering incoherently, his eyes wandering, unfocused. As Dr. Sharma administered first aid, he began to thrash and scream that a huge talking wolf had kept him there for several days. He claimed the creature had not physically harmed him but was constantly nearby, studying him. Gradually, thanks to a sedative administered by Sharma and her gentle, persistent voice, Mark regained some composure and elaborated on what had happened. His account confirmed the team's worst fears. He babbled that the Vargur, he described it as a monstrously sized creature, resembling a wolf but moving on both 4 and 2 legs and possessing undeniable signs of intelligence, had brought him water and some raw food, preventing him from starving. But the most terrifying thing, according to Mark, was that the Vargur had tried to communicate with him. It showed him various objects, apparently found on other victims, a smartphone, an LED flashlight, a metal lighter, poking at them with its huge clawed paw and emitting low, questioning growls that, in Mark's opinion, were not mere animalistic grunts. The Vargur had tried to make him speak, repeating simple words after him, distorting them beyond recognition, but preserving the intonation. Mark also mentioned that the wolf had examined his clothes, shoes, and camping gear with great interest, even dismantling his wristwatch, displaying considerable dexterity with its 4 paws. It became perfectly clear that the Vargur had intentionally left Mark alive. Moreover, it had either allowed him to activate his emergency beacon or simply hadn't interfered. This was not an act of mercy. It was another move in its sinister game, a way to convey a new message to its pursuers, demonstrate its growing intellect, and learn more about those hunting it through their reaction to rescuing the bait. Orion realized that the Vargur was not just a bloodthirsty predator blindly following instincts. This creature possessed reason, sought to understand a new, hostile world, and was adapting to it using all available means. The team immediately began evacuating Mark to the TOB. The return journey was no less difficult, now burdened by the need to carry the weakened tourist. Back at base, Corporal Davis provided Mark with more skilled medical attention. Dr. Sharma, waiting until the rescued man's condition stabilized somewhat, conducted a detailed debriefing, meticulously recording his every word, every detail of his story. The information obtained from Mark forced all members of Griffin 1 to reevaluate their adversary and reconsider their entire tactical approach. The Vargur was not just a target to be hunted down and destroyed. It was an opponent equal in intellect and in some aspects even superior, while also possessing colossal physical strength and animalistic fury. Before finally succumbing to a heavy, drug-induced sleep from the horror he had endured and the strong painkiller Davis had administered, Mark suddenly opened his eyes, focused his gaze on Orion, who stood silently in a corner of the cabin, and said in a quiet but distinct voice, It said, "It senses in you ancient blood. It's waiting specifically for you." After these words, Mark lost consciousness. Orion showed no outward reaction to this message. His face remained impassive, but a chill ran through him. The Vargur was not just intelligent. It also possessed some sort of preternatural sense, recognizing his true ancient nature. This made the impending confrontation even more dangerous and unpredictable. The new information from the rescued tourist, Mark, and especially his final words addressed to Orion, compelled Griffin 1 to reevaluate their plans. It became clear that the Vargur not only possessed high intelligence, but was also aware of Orion's unique nature. This knowledge influenced its subsequent tactics. A day after Mark's rescue, Sergeant Renner, conducting reconnaissance north of the TOB, discovered a new set of Vargur tracks. This time, the tracks were unusually large, clear, and deep. The creature was deliberately not trying to conceal its movement. They led towards a narrow, winding canyon, known on old maps as Devil's Whisper, a place with a notorious reputation even among experienced hunters and trappers who tried to avoid it. Everything indicated that the Vargur had left these tracks as bait, an invitation to follow. Orion immediately sensed a trap. His centuries of experience as a hunter and warrior told him this was a setup. However, Lieutenant Rostova, under intense pressure to deliver results and eager to end this exhausting and dangerous operation as soon as possible, decided to investigate the canyon. She believed that even if it was a trap, their knowledge of the terrain and numerical superiority, however slight, would give them an advantage. Griffin 1, in full strength, Rostova, Orion, Sharma, Renner, and Davis entered Devil's Whisper Canyon the next morning with the first rays of sunlight. They observed all precautions, moving in a dispersed chain, constantly monitoring sectors of fire. Sergeant Renner, as the most experienced tracker, led the way, carefully examining the ground and canyon walls. Orion brought up the rear, covering their six. The canyon walls, composed of layered sandstone, rose almost vertically for several hundred feet, leaving only a narrow strip of sky overhead. Avenues for retreat and maneuver were extremely limited. Corporal Davis, carrying the communications equipment, soon reported that due to the terrain and magnetic anomalies characteristic of the area, he had lost stable connection with Dunton's situational center. The team was isolated. The oppressive silence that reigned in the canyon frayed their nerves. Every fallen pebble, every rustle underfoot, sounded deafeningly loud, echoing manifold off the rock walls. The attack came suddenly, without any warning. The Vargur, knowing this terrain perfectly, descended upon them from above. First, an avalanche of rocks, from small pebbles to boulders the size of a human head, cascaded down from the canyon rim. The rockfall was clearly provoked and directed to cut off the team's vanguard from the main force and sow panic. The operatives barely had time to disperse and take cover behind rock outcrops. Immediately thereafter, the Vargur attacked from the flank. It moved with incredible, almost implausible speed for its enormous size, appearing from around a bend in the canyon like a gigantic enraged shadow. Its objective was to cut off and eliminate the rear guard and the specialists who posed the greatest technological threat: Davis, the communications expert, and Sharma, the analyst. Corporal Jake Thunder Davis, simultaneously trying to re-establish the broken link with the situational center and firing his assault rifle, found himself cut off from the main group by a landslide triggered by a second rock fall. The Vargur, ignoring the fire from the other operatives, made a gigantic leap from a ledge at least 20 feet high and landed directly on the unfortunate communications specialist. Davis's short, desperate cry was cut off mid-transmission by a horrifying gurgling sound and the sickening noise of tearing flesh and breaking bones. His personal transmitter embedded in his helmet went silent forever. Lieutenant Rostova, seeing they had fallen into a meticulously planned ambush and were taking their first casualties, her voice cracking, ordered a retreat towards the canyon exit. But it was already too late. Sergeant Alex Ghost Renner, seeing the Vargar, having dealt with Davis, flanking the remaining group, and attacking Dr. Sharma, who, despite her shock, was trying to return fire with her submachine gun, made an instant decision. He drew the monster's attention to himself, opening up with aimed fire from his sniper rifle. Several bullets hit the Vargar in the chest and shoulder, but caused no serious harm, only enraging it further. As the Vargar charged him, Renner discarded his rifle, useless at such close range, and drew his combat knife, its broad blade forged from a high silver alloy, and his pistol, loaded with silver core rounds. He engaged in a desperate, unequal fight. He managed to inflict several deep cuts on the Vargar and even fire at point-blank range, leaving a smoking, poorly healing wound on the creature's side from a silver bullet. But the odds were too uneven. With one powerful blow of its massive, clawed paw, the Vargar threw Renner several yards. The sergeant hit his head on a rock and went limp. The monster leaped upon him and with a single movement snapped his cervical vertebrae. Alex Renner, former Delta Force operator, survival specialist, died a hero's death, defending his comrades to the last. Orion, Lieutenant Rostova, and Dr. Sharma, now only 3 against an enraged and wounded but still incredibly strong adversary, fought their way out of the canyon's deadly trap. They fired every remaining weapon, using flashbangs and fragmentation grenades to slow the Vargar and buy precious seconds. Orion moved with inhuman speed and precision, covering the women's retreat, his shots finding their mark, forcing the monster to momentarily recoil. The Vargar, wounded by silver and surprised by such fierce and coordinated resistance from the survivors, did not immediately pursue them once they emerged from the narrow part of the canyon into more open terrain. Reaching a relatively safe place, exhausted, concussed, and shaken to their core, they assessed the extent of their losses. 2 of their comrades were dead. Orion, usually imperturbable and outwardly calm, clenched his fists so tightly his knuckles turned white. In his ancient eyes, momentarily losing their detachment, swirled a millennia-old fury and a deep, searing pain. He blamed himself for what had happened, for not foreseeing and preventing this tragedy. The return to the TOB was arduous and silent. Physically and morally drained, having lost 2 operatives, the 3 survivors could barely stay on their feet. The first thing Lieutenant Rostova did, after re-establishing communications with Dunton's situational center, Davis's equipment was destroyed, but Rostova had a backup set, was to send Director Hamilton a black report, an official notification of critical losses within the team and the de facto failure of the current phase of the operation. For the first time during their collaboration on this mission, she saw Orion's mask of icy composure crack. He said nothing, but his movements as he silently inspected his weapon and gear became sharp, predatory, filled with restrained fury. Something ancient and dangerous was awakening within him. At the TOB in the dilapidated trapper's cabin, an oppressive, heavy atmosphere settled. The deaths of Corporal Davis and Sergeant Renner were a terrible blow to Lieutenant Rostova and Dr. Sharma. They had lost not just comrades in arms, but friends, people with whom they had weathered many dangerous missions. Sharma, to distract herself from mournful thoughts and feelings of guilt, threw herself into her work. She meticulously analyzed data from the surviving operatives' helmet cams. Davis's camera was completely destroyed by the Vargur's impact, but fragments of video from Renner's camera, miraculously preserved on a damaged storage medium, she managed to retrieve and restore. She spent hours reviewing these last tragic frames, searching for any vulnerabilities in the Vargur's behavior, any detail that might help them. Rostova, meanwhile, prepared a detailed report for Director Hamilton, understanding that Operation Devil's Claw was on the brink of complete failure, and that she, as team commander, would bear full responsibility for what had transpired. Orion, however, withdrew from them. He was no longer just a consultant with vague authority. The deaths of his comrades in misfortune, men whom he, despite his detachment, had begun to respect in his own way, had awakened something within him that had slumbered for centuries. His movements became smoother, yet more predatory and lethal. His voice, when he occasionally answered Rostova's or Sharma's questions, sounded lower and deeper, with steely, almost metallic undertones. Even his gaze changed. In the depths of his eyes, usually veiled by an eon of weariness, now burned a cold, unquenchable fire. He began to prepare for the coming battle, not as a special operative, but as an ancient warrior preparing for his final decisive conflict. He tested his hidden reserves, the incredible strength and endurance granted by his curse, which he had not fully utilized for many centuries. Ava Rostova and Arya Sharma watched this frightening metamorphosis in their enigmatic companion with growing unease and an involuntary measure of awe. A few hours after sending the Black Report, Director Hamilton made an emergency contact. His voice, usually calm and even, now sounded tense and harsh. He listened to Rostova's brief oral report on the details of the canyon ambush and the operatives' deaths. Then he announced his decision. Griffin 1 had two options. First, immediate evacuation and official acknowledgement of complete mission failure. In this case, Hamilton implied, sanitization protocol would be enacted, carpet bombing of the entire suspected Vargur activity zone, with special fuel-air explosives and incendiary mixtures. This would guarantee the creature's destruction, but also lead to an inevitable ecological catastrophe in the unique Yellowstone Nature Preserve, immense reputational losses for the government, and unpredictable political consequences. The second option, a final, desperate attempt to neutralize the Vargur with the remaining team members, Orion, Rostova, and Sharma. Hamilton unequivocally indicated that in this scenario, special, almost impossible hopes were pinned on Orion, vaguely mentioning his unique abilities and experience, of which the Dunton director was far more aware than anyone suspected. Lieutenant Rostova, weighing all pros and cons, had already begun to speak of the necessity of evacuation and the impossibility of continuing the operation with such small numbers against so powerful an adversary when Orion suddenly interrupted her. "I'm staying," he said quietly but firmly. There was no trace of doubt in his voice. "This creature is my responsibility. I must finish this." He didn't speak of revenge for his fallen comrades, but it was clearly legible in his eyes, in the tense line of his jaw. For him, this confrontation had become something far greater than just another mission to neutralize an unconventional threat. It had become a matter of honor, a question of atonement, a part of his eternal, inscrutable destiny. Orion proposed a new, extremely risky plan. He himself would act as bait to lure the Vargur to an open, pre-selected location. He counted on his superhuman endurance, incredible reaction speed, and ability for rapid regeneration of damaged tissues, which he hoped would give him a chance to withstand a direct confrontation with the monster. Rostova and Sharma were to provide him with fire support from ambush using all their remaining special equipment, including the last experimental silver core rounds and several powerful improvised explosive devices they would fashion from available materials, adding silver shrapnel elements. It was a desperate plan, almost suicidal, but they had no other choice. The team immediately began preparations. Dr. Sharma, once again meticulously studying all available data on the Vargur, its behavior, physiology, and especially its reaction to silver, the wound inflicted by Sergeant Renner's bullet, judging by thermal traces they later managed to capture, had been slow to heal and caused the creature evident suffering. Modified their remaining ammunition and began constructing IEDs with maximum silver content. Lieutenant Rostova selected a suitable ambush position, a small clearing surrounded by rocks, with only one convenient entrance and exit. She carefully mined all approaches to the clearing, using their remaining motion sensors and makeshift tripwires. Orion prepared in his own way. He not only readied his weapons and gear, but also spent long hours in deep meditation, awakening within himself those ancient primal forces and instincts that had lain dormant for many centuries of his long cursed life. During preparations for the final showdown, Dr. Sharma made another crucial discovery. Studying the primitive drawings found in the Vargur's lair and analyzing audio recordings of its roars and howls made during previous encounters, especially during the canyon attack, when the creature emitted many unintelligible but clearly articulated sounds, she noticed certain recurring phonetic structures and intonational modulations. She informed Orion and Rostova that the Vargur was not merely mimicking environmental sounds or human speech, but was speaking some archaic proto-language. She showed Orion several symbols from the cave paintings that she had partially deciphered by comparing them with known ancient sign systems. Orion glanced at the tablet she handed him displaying the symbols. His face did not flinch, but a flicker of recognition crossed the depths of his eyes. He knew these symbols. They were elements of an ancient, cursed tongue spoken by creatures of darkness, spawn of chaos, in those immemorial times when the world was still young. He said nothing to Sharma about his recognition, but his resolve to end the Vargur only hardened. He realized he was facing not a mutated animal or an unknown scientific species, but something far more ancient and sinister. As dusk fell, Orion left the TOB. He eschewed most electronic navigation and communication aids, taking only the bare essentials, a knife, a pistol with silver bullets, and several modified grenades. He began tracking the Vargur, relying solely on his heightened senses, millennia of hunting experience, and that inexplicable, almost mystical intuition that always led him to the spawn of darkness. He followed the trail of the wounded beast, which, despite the injuries sustained in the canyon, remained deadly, cunning, and unpredictable. The trail was fresh. The Vargur clearly wasn't trying too hard to hide its presence. It expected pursuit, knowing Orion would come for it. The trail led Orion to a remote, virtually unexplored part of the Yellowstone volcanic plateau, an area of particularly high geothermal activity. Here, Amid steaming fumaroles, hot springs, and rocks stained in surreal colors by mineral deposits, lay hidden an ancient, dilapidated Native American sanctuary. It was a place of power, known to few shamans and healers of long-vanished tribes, a place imbued with old primal magic and the scent of centuries-old blood spilled during forgotten rituals. The Vargar had chosen this place for the decisive battle, not by chance. It instinctively sensed its special energy, which it hoped would lend it strength. Lieutenant Rostova and Dr. Sharma, exercising maximum caution and using all their camouflage skills, covertly followed Orion at a safe distance, maintaining an interval of roughly half a mile. Their task was to occupy a prearranged fire support position and be ready to intervene when the situation became critical. Orion entered the sanctuary's central area, a large, almost perfectly circular stone amphitheater, formed naturally or by the hands of ancient builders. In the center of the circle stood a dilapidated altar stone, covered in moss and cracks. The silence was almost absolute, broken only by the hiss of steam escaping from fissures in the earth and the distant gurgling of mud pots. Orion stopped in the center of the circle, his figure tensed like a coiled spring. He knew the Vargar was here. He could feel its fetid breath, its heavy, scrutinizing gaze. The attack came instantly, from the deep shadow cast by one of the tall stone stelae framing the sanctuary. The Vargar lunged at Orion with a furious roar, its enormous claws aimed at his throat. A fierce, inhuman battle commenced. Orion demonstrated all the incredible strength, reaction speed, and millennia-honed combat skills he had so long concealed beneath the guise of an ordinary, albeit highly capable man. He evaded the Vargar's deadly attacks with the grace of a dancer, his own strikes precise and devastating. The Vargar responded with equal primal fury and power, its claws and fangs tearing deep bleeding wounds on Orion's body. But to the lycanthrope's indescribable astonishment, these wounds, which would have been fatal to any other creature, began to seal themselves on Orion's body before its very eyes, leaving only smoking scars that quickly faded and vanished. At one point in the struggle, when Orion delivered a particularly powerful blow to the Vargar, breaking one of its forelegs and impaling its side with a sharp fragment of a ritual stone that, by a stroke of luck, contained inclusions of native silver, the lycanthrope recoiled, emitting a long, drawn-out howl of pain and surprise. It panted heavily, its massive chest heaving, dark, thick saliva mixed with blood dripping from its jaws. It looked at Orion with its burning amber eyes, in which there was no longer blind fury, but something else, recognition mixed with primal terror. Its growl suddenly gained coherence, transforming into hoarse, guttural words spoken in that same ancient cursed tongue that Orion knew as well as his own. Blood. Your blood. It smells of the ancient. This cannot be. You are the eternal, the cursed son. I have heard of you, the marked, the cast out, the forgotten monster, Cain. Eva Rostova and Arya Sharma, witnessing this incredible battle through the powerful optics of a sniper rifle, and hearing the Vargar's inhuman roar and Orion's reciprocal, unintelligible to them, but clearly meaningful words via the tactical microphone, which Orion, absorbed in combat, had not disabled, fell into a state of profound shock, bordering on stupor. The lycanthrope's words, partially understood and translated by Sharma, who had encountered some roots of this ancient language during her research, revealed to them the incredible, terrifying truth about their commander, about the enigmatic consultant Orion. He was not just a unique Dunton operative. He was something far more ancient, powerful, and frightening than they had imagined. A creature from myths and legends, a spawn of times when the world was entirely different. The Vargur, despite the recognition and the ancient genetic fear that the name Eternal Cursed One instilled in all spawn of darkness, did not retreat. On the contrary, the fury and desperation of realizing whom it faced lent it new, desperate strength. "You thought I would falter before you, despicable son of Cain?" it snarled, leaning heavily on its uninjured paw. "I have seen stars fall from the heavens and these mountains born. I have fought those your wretched mortal kind once called gods. I will not yield so easily to the first of the cursed." The battle resumed with new, even greater force and fury. Now it was not just a hunt for a dangerous monster conducted by a secret government unit. It was a clash of two ancient powerful entities, two eternal curses, met in mortal combat in the arena of an ancient forgotten sanctuary. Orion cast off the last vestiges of his human restraint, his eyes flaring with an unholy crimson fire. Lieutenant Rostova and Dr. Sharma realized with horror that their meticulously planned ambush and fire support were utterly useless against such a level of confrontation. They could only watch, transfixed by terror and awe, ready to intervene if even the slightest, ghostly opportunity to help Orion presented itself, though they were no longer sure which of the two needed help more. Their world, their understanding of reality, had collapsed in an instant, buried beneath the ruins of the ancient sanctuary and the echoes of an inhuman battle. The ancient Native American sanctuary became an arena for a titanic battle that shook the very earth. Massive stone stelae, standing for millennia, crumbled and fell under the crushing blows of the two supernatural beings. The air filled with the scent of blood, ozone, and burning stone. Orion and the Vargur inflicted horrific wounds upon each other, wounds that would have been instantly fatal to any other living creature. Orion moved with incredible speed and precision, using not only his inhuman strength but also a profound knowledge of ancient martial arts, adapted over centuries for combat against such monstrosities. The Vargur, in turn, relied on its primal bestial might, razor-sharp claws capable of tearing steel, enormous fangs designed for crushing bone, and the innate cunning of a predator honed to perfection. Despite his incredible regenerative abilities, Orion felt the limits of his power. The Vargur, fighting with the fury of the doomed, had inflicted several particularly grievous wounds. At one point, the monster, maneuvering deftly, tore off Orion's left arm at the shoulder. Then, before Orion could react, the Vargur pierced his chest with its claws, breaking ribs and nearly reaching his heart. Orion's blood, dark, almost black, poured copiously onto the sanctuary grounds. His regeneration slowed noticeably. The damage was too severe and inflicted too rapidly, even for his cursed body. Lieutenant Rostova, watching this scene in horror through the scope of her HK-417 rifle, realized Orion was on the brink of death. She ordered Dr. Sharma to immediately prepare an emergency medical kit with all their available stimulants and regenerative drugs, and be ready for Orion's immediate evacuation should he lose consciousness. Rostova herself, overcoming her paralyzing fear, opened aimed fire on the Vargur with her heavy assault rifle, loaded with silver core rounds. The bullets found their mark, forcing the lycanthrope to roar in pain and momentarily divert its attention from Orion. But they only briefly slowed the monster, failing to inflict decisive damage. Gathering the last vestiges of his supernatural strength, as the Vargur, swatting away Rostova's harassing fire, turned back to him and prepared to deliver a final fatal blow, Orion made a desperate, almost impossible lunge. He used the only weapon he had left, one he always carried, a small, unassuming obsidian knife, its blade crusted with the dried blood of previous vanquished foes and consecrated with his own ancient blood. This knife was not merely a weapon, but an ancient artifact, possessing a special power against the spawn of darkness. Orion poured all his remaining supernatural might, all his millennia-old fury and pain, into a single, precise, and calculated strike. The obsidian blade, passing through thick hide and muscle, shattered the Vargur's spine with a sickening crunch and pierced its massive, furiously beating heart. The lycanthrope emitted a deafening, deathly howl, filled with pain, rage, and mute surprise. The howl echoed throughout Yellowstone Park, silencing all nocturnal birds and beasts. Then its enormous body convulsed. Black, smoking blood gushed from its wounds, and it began to rapidly decay, disintegrating into ash and acrid black smoke that was instantly dispersed by a gust of night wind. Moments later, where the mighty Vargur had stood, only a pile of cinders and a few charred bones remained. Orion, drained of his last strength, collapsed unconscious onto the ground amidst the ruins of the ancient sanctuary. He was mutilated, almost dead, his body a single massive bleeding wound. Eva Rostova and Arya Sharma, certain of his demise, ran to him with desperate cries. And then, before their eyes, something occurred that they would never forget. Something that forever changed their understanding of the world and of human or inhuman capabilities. Orion's severed arm, lying a few feet from his body, began to slowly but visibly regenerate. From the stump of his shoulder, new tissues stretched forth, forming muscle, bone, skin. The horrific wounds on his chest and body began to seal, broken bones knitting together with quiet cracks. After several agonizing hours of recovery, accompanied by convulsions and soft moans, Orion regained consciousness. He was physically whole, not a single scar remaining on his body save for those he had borne for centuries. But his eyes were empty. He was mentally devastated. All his life force had been expended in this final battle and this incredible resurrection. Eva and Arya stared at him with a mixture of unspeakable horror, reverent awe, and the deepest, all-consuming shock. Their world, their scientific knowledge, their logic, all had crumbled before this irrefutable miracle. Sometime later, a Dunton evacuation team arrived, an unmarked, nondescript helicopter that landed on the nearest suitable clearing. Top-level concealment protocols were enacted. The official cover story for Operation Devil's Claw became a meticulously crafted legend about the neutralization of a particularly dangerous mutated wolf pack whose aggression was supposedly caused by an accidental leak of experimental chemicals from a secret military facility, which of course did not exist. The bodies of Corporal Davis and Sergeant Renner were evacuated with full honors as operatives fallen in the line of duty. Their families were informed of a tragic death during secret training exercises in a remote area. The site of the final battle in the ancient sanctuary and the remains of the TOB were meticulously sanitized by a special team under sterile zone protocol, leaving not the slightest trace of the events that had transpired. Ava Rostova and Daria Sharma underwent a lengthy and grueling debriefing with Director Hamilton and several other high-ranking Dunton officials. They signed top-level non-disclosure agreements, understanding that any breach would have the most severe consequences. Their careers within Dunton were over. They were offered honorable retirement with a very generous severance package, a lifetime pension, and certain other privileges, but with the mandatory condition of constant, albeit discreet, surveillance by security services. They had seen too much, knew too much. Orion, who in rare moments of solitude called himself Kane, returned to his Spartan, almost empty apartment in a Washington suburb. He looked at his fully healed hands, on which no trace of the terrible wounds remained. In his ancient eyes, there was a bottomless, universal weariness, and a deep, unyielding sorrow for the blood spilled his own, others, the guilty and the innocent. He spoke softly, almost in a whisper, into the emptiness of the room, addressing that unknown, omnipotent force that had once cursed him with eternal life and eternal war. How much longer? How many more innocent and guilty souls must be sacrificed in this endless offering before this accursed atonement finally ends? Or is this my eternal, unchanging fate? As always, there was no answer. The silence of the room was his only companion.